Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm Ian Fisher. I'm your host for today, and we've got another great edition of College Coach Reads. I don't even know if that's what we call the segments, but we've got an awesome book that we're going to talk about today. And joining me to have that conversation is my fellow co-host, Sally Ganga. Hey, Sally, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks so much for having me on.
I'm glad to have you here on the show that you also host. And we've also got Jean Mahan on the show. She is a college finance expert here with College Coach and is going to be helping to point out where Sally and I are wrong throughout this discussion. Jean, it's great to have you on the show too.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Now, a while back, we all read a great book about the admission process and had a really wonderful and enlightening conversation, Sally and me and Shannon from the finance side. And we wanted today to have an opportunity to talk about, I'm going to hold this up for those of you who can see the show. It's called The Price You Pay for College. It's by Ron Lieber, who is a reporter with the New York Times, also the father of a pair of, I believe, teenage girls who are starting to think about going to college. I was really struck at how recently this thing was written. He talks about the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic on the cost of going to school and what people are paying for. So it is extremely timely. It's a terrific book. And I think we want to sink our teeth into some of the key elements of it for those of you who might be thinking about getting it. And we can unpack some of those core ideas. Now, Lieber he splits the book up into 5 parts. And we wanted to spend this first segment of our show talking about part 1, where he's really digging into the price and cost of college and the systems behind it. And Jean, I think we'll start with you because of your expertise in the financial aid space. I think one of the things that I was most struck by is how he's calling out the mainstreaming of merit aid as a discounting tool. As tuition prices continue to rise and rise and rise, merit aid has come in to sort of alleviate that pressure. Can you help give a summary for the role that merit aid plays for an institution and how families tend to interact with it?
Sure. So merit aid is a great way to fill seats. Everyone wants a discount. You want a discount when you go to the supermarket. You want a discount when you buy a car. You want a discount when you go to college too. And so if you're offered $20,000 or $30,000 in a scholarship or a discount each year, that's going to make you think and look twice about that particular college. And I think families often think, well, I'll have to apply to a public school because that's going to be cheaper. Not necessarily. The cost of college with a scholarship at private school could bring it within just a few $1,000s of what your in-state public. It may not bring it right down to the rock bottom, but sometimes if someone has to pay $5,000 or $8,000 more, they're like, okay, I can do that. And so I think a lot of families, especially those whose parents haven't been to college for many years, remember the days when, in order to get a merit scholarship, you had to have really high SATs or straight A's or be the star football player or play a mean cello or something like that. Yeah. And those days are, I'm sure that some of that is taken into account, but most schools are very opaque about how they're awarding this money. Rarely do you see a grid, except on some public schools, and even this is more pre-pandemic, where it would say, this GPA, this SAT will get you this much money. Not now.
Now, you have a lot of conversations with families every day around paying for college. The way that he describes it, really, merit aid has become something that is really ubiquitous for lots and lots of private schools. It's a strategy that they're implementing. What would you say is the general awareness of that on the part of families that you talk to? Do they understand the role that merit aid currently plays for a lot of schools? Do they see those two differences in sticker price between the public and the private and say, oh, but there's going to be a discount rate that's going to make that more affordable? Or if this is content that most people are unaware of?
I would say that most people are unaware of it. They may hear that certain schools give scholarships, but again, it's so difficult to determine who's giving that scholarship to whom. So, your student may be an awesome student, but if they have tons of kids applying from that particular high school or that region, you may not be the one they're looking for. They might be looking for somebody that lives in an area where they don't attract a lot of students, or they're looking for more males or females or different ethnicities or different students from different socioeconomic groups that they're hoping to attract. So, I mean, yeah, I think a lot of people are still in that mindset where you have to be a superstar, because often parents will say to me, well, my kid is just sort of an average student, so they're not going to get it. Well, that may be a no problem school for your student, or a really, easy school to get into. There could be merit money on the table there. So,
Sally, you and I are, well, we know about college finance, and we've been in higher education for quite a while. We have conversations with families. I was really struck as I was reading this book just about the language and the tone in a lot of spaces. As a parent of a 9 and an almost 8-year-old, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so terrified here about the cost of college in some respects. What were your big takeaways as you started reading through this? Were there things that surprised you, especially through part 1, that you just weren't expecting?
Honestly, I wasn't surprised, because I worked at one of the schools where the consultants came in and figured out how to maximize every dollar. And that was Whittier College, honestly. I mean, it was such a joy, by the way, to work at Chicago, where they didn't have to worry about money at all. And we were like, we don't care how much money you need, we've got it, so but like at Whittier, this is not a high income school. I mean, it's a great place. I believed in the mission, but I had students coming in taking out loans to attend that I was sort of not sure of. I mean, I actually almost tried to talk one young man out of attending. I mean, I wanted him to attend Whittier, but he was going to have to borrow so much money. I didn't say don't come here, but I did say I want you to be aware of what you're going to borrow by the time you graduate.
Yeah.
And what that's going to mean in terms of repayment, because so I wasn't surprised. What I was, though, is I sort of felt a little mournful. I went to college kind of in the tail end of when, even if you were an English major, you sort of didn't worry about it as much, because you probably were only going to borrow less than $20,000 even to attend a really expensive college. If your parents could demonstrate need. And I know there's lots of families that say, look, we needed the money, even though we didn't demonstrate it. But, I came in at the tail end of that. I had some very low income friends who they did have to take out loans, but they were very moderate. I was in that boat. And so honestly, I've just felt kind of sad and mournful about it. To be honest.
I can see that. And I think there was especially, chapter 2 is all about the FAFSA and the EFC and kind of the process that goes into determining what a family's expected financial contribution is going to be. And it is really surprising the way, and I think mournful is a great word, we as a society have decided who is responsible for paying for education. As these sticker prices continue to stack up, more and more it's being put on the shoulders of parents or students in the form of debt. And the formulas don't feel like they're catching up with the rates that are being charged for students to get their education. Never mind the fact that the information is so hard to get into. What do you think, Gene? I mean, you've been tracking this stuff for a long time. Were there aspects of Lieber's observations that you felt were especially important in that first part that you would really want to call attention to people who might be reading it as lay people?
So, yeah, I think I rarely meet families that are happy with their expected family contribution. They'll ask me often, oh, this is what I'm expected to pay for 4 years, right? Nope, that's what you're expected to pay for 1 year.
Yeah.
And it can be really shocking to them. I think that I felt like he was right on target with things. One thing I would say is that we're on the tail end of this FAFSA. So, into the 24-25 school year, the FAFSA is changing. So there are some really good things that are going to happen with that. Like there's going to be a whole lot fewer questions that families have to answer, and they're not going to ask questions about their untaxed income, like the contributions that they make to retirement. And they're going to increase the income and asset protection allowances, which is also good because families don't realize that, if you're 65, more of your income and assets are protected than if you're 45, because obviously you're close to retirement at that point.
Yeah.
So I think that it remains to be seen what this is going to mean for families, because right now, if you have 2 kids in college, your family contribution is divided. So you pay a little, your eligibility for financial aid is probably somewhat greater. That's going away. And that's why we're hoping with these increases in the income and asset protection allowances and not having to report contributions to retirement, or kids who come from families where maybe a grandparent is providing some tuition assistance. Those have all had to be reported in the current FAFSA. That's going away in the 24-25 school year. So fingers crossed that helps families. We probably won't know for another year or so. There are no models right now where families can kind of go in and say, like there is right now, there's a net price calculator that if your student is going to school in the next year or so, you can use and get a sense of, hey, how much will this school actually cost me? But there are no models. If you've got a 9th or 10th grader, you're kind of, in the dark about all this. Yeah. And I would say that not all net price calculators are created equal. Some are awesome and they're really, really good. And some of them I've seen either haven't been updated or they're just not good. And so, if you feel like you're on the cusp and you're not getting the information, it may be worth reaching out to the school's financial aid office to dig a little deeper and see if they can sort of guide you. This is what it looks like, and so no. And then you can make your choices based on, okay, the school doesn't give any merit aid and we can't afford it. Let's look at something else.
There's something really interesting in, college is such a unique experience for everyone that has the opportunity to go. It is in some sense a consumer product. Mm-hmm. You are paying in exchange for a good. And I love, actually, he has this great trio of reasons you might choose to go to college. One is for career, one is to find your people, and one is for the sake of learning, essentially. And he says everybody's got some combination that pulls from these 3 spaces, or maybe it just comes from one of those 3 spaces, but it's really important for you to understand as you're choosing a college, which of those things is most important to you and what you're actually paying for. But still, it's a funky kind of product in that it doesn't behave according to a lot of the ways that we think about other consumer products. I think consumers themselves are a little reticent to ask questions, the way that you might at a car dealership. Why am I paying for this extra stuff? Right. You don't necessarily do that with a financial aid office because you don't want to offend them. And he points that out. Right. He wants to empower the consumers in this space. I wonder, Sally, you're thinking about, how do you think about college? Should it be thought of more as this kind of consumer product where you're buying a service, or is there something special about it that still puts it in this space where it can't be talked about in the kind of way that we talk about cars or homes or anything else that we buy?
I mean, I'm still wedded to it as a transformational experience. And that's always what I hope for with my students. Yeah. And I'm very clear that doesn't mean they should take out 100,000, but I think the wonderful news is I've had friends who had that starting at the community college. I actually think it's much more likely and common at a 4-year school that has a very strong sense of community. But I have to say, though, I can tell the public has just shifted over time to more of that kind of transactional viewpoint. And to the point where when I talk to someone who's just I just really want to learn. And, I was reading about genomes the other day and and I'm like, you are going to love college, Yeah. And so I hope that stays as part of it. And honestly, very importantly, not just at the most selective colleges out right. there. This is part of what made me feel mournful was this idea that a low-income student might choose to be an electrician when they might have loved to get a degree in English. And if you want to be an electrician, go for it. That is an awesome job, and it's not something I can ever do. But if that's not what you want to do, right? If what you'd rather do is get an English degree, but you feel like I can't afford that, and so you give up that transformational opportunity. I'm just sad about that, but I don't blame people for that, making that choice.
there is a sense in which I think colleges have really responded to expectations from consumers in the way that they talk about their programs, I think with rare exceptions, but you don't see as much of schools defending the English major at their institution. They are talking about things like STEM. And not to, people say STEM majors are going to get you a career after you graduate. And that's true. But there are English majors who are able to have very successful careers as well. Mm-hmm. And it's been interesting to see a lot of institutions kind of change the marketing in terms of how they talk about what their school has to offer in response to what consumers are looking for, because there are a finite number of students, and colleges are competing for those customers as well. It's just a very strange relationship that institutions of higher ed have with the students, and the federal government kind of being in the middle in the way that it allocates funding for students through financial aid. Were there other things in this first section, Jean, that you felt like I would really love for everybody to know this as they're thinking about the college process?
Sure. Sally, I 100% agree with you about the college experience. I just loved my 4 years of college. I grew so much, and I just had a great experience. It was a different time, obviously. I mean, I did borrow student loans to go. And interestingly enough, the other day, I was like, gee, the amount that I graduated in debt with, I wonder what that would be in today's dollars. And it would be exactly the amount that a student could borrow through the federal student loan program now. So I felt a little bit better about that. So I feel like people need to, unfortunately, this has become transactional. When 1 year of college costs more than my first home, that needs to be dealt with. People have to, find out what is going to be the end game for them. And as Ian said, what part of those things, I hear a lot of families talk about return on investment. If I'm paying X number of dollars, I want my kid to get a job at X place when they graduate. And so, are they looking to see where those kids are going after they graduate? I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask. People will say to me, well, I feel greedy asking for a discount, or I feel greedy and they're going to, remember me and they're not going to think well of me. Nope, they're not going to even, because after they hang up from the phone from you, they're going to be on with somebody else asking the exact same question. And why shouldn't you get in line for some of that money? Don't be ashamed. You go in and bargain for a car. You should, that's the cost has gotten so that you have to bargain for this as well. So I don't think people should feel embarrassed by this. And I empower them to go and do it. Just do it nicely. That's all. Don't go in there all grabby and greedy. Just, nicely say, could we have more? This is an expensive proposition for us.
Yeah, one of the great surprising pieces of this book from my perspective was just the sheer volume of content that Lieber includes to help families in having those conversations, not just in talking specifically about the aid package and how to make it more attractive, but also how to identify the values at different institutions, where they might help support students, and what the best match for your student is. So we're going to take a quick break and come back and talk a little bit about what he has to say for families that are going through the college search process, and how some of those major factors in finding the best fit intersect with the cost of college. Don't go away.